I'm not going to lean on my ERG to drive an external initiative, especially for a Fortune 100 company. Although they are recognized, that's a job. And that's a job that requires a skill set that an ERG leader may or may not have. I'm an expert in myself as being a Black woman in a walking intersection. I'm not an expert in all Black women. When you know better, you do better.
Welcome back to another episode of the ERG Movement Podcast. Here on this podcast, we bring some amazing people in from all around the ERG space, and today is no different. We have Ain here with us today, and she's here to share. She's been in the ERG space for a bit, some best practices. I'm really excited to dive into it. I'm passing it over to you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this space.
Oh, thank you, Maceo. I love being in this space, and this is actually my dream job to be working in the ERG space. My name is Ain. 3 letters can never be so difficult, but it's a name that it's Arabic, and it means precious. It's wonderful to be able to live out and see the precious and preciousness of each community as I work in this space. I've been within IND in the ERG space for around 20 years. In my company, I started the first ERG called for our Black community back in 2007, and I've since grown to 13 ERGs, and we call them business resource groups, where we work that impact the business as well as celebrate days of observances and holidays. I got into this space because I was truly born in it. We can quote a line from Batman and say, I was born into the darkness, raised by the darkness, thinking about Bane, but in a good way. My parents were Black Panthers. And so having Seattle, Washington being the second chapter outside of Oakland for the Panthers, I grew up in a very passionate household, focus on social improvement as well as understanding social injustice and ways to change it. My mother chose to make change through education. My father chose to make change through his artistry and being an architect and one of the few Black architects in his field. And so I saw that change firsthand as I pioneered the way for ERGs within my company as well.
Love that. Already taking notes because there's some things I definitely want to circle back on. I think one of the first ones that just come to mind, hearing that you founded the first ERG at your company and that it was a Black ERG, which is interesting to a lot of people because I think a lot of people automatically associate the women's ERG has to probably be the first because oftentimes it is the largest group. But even then, historically, the Black ERG was the first ERG to ever exist. So anyway, that being said, going back to your time when you first founded this ERG, what was like your thought process and why this space needed to happen and how did you go about it?
Indeed. Now, make no mistake, we had affinity groups. So we had a women's affinity group, we had a pride affinity group that was really focused on the social aspect and community. What made the ERG different and ensuring that it was different was the focus on attracting, developing, and retaining talent for the company. And so, understanding the location of the company, we were already disappropriately, I would say, represented as Black folk within that part of the country. And so, how do you attract key talent? And then from there, how do you develop that talent so it feels that sense of belonging? They're engaged, they know that there's upward mobility. And then retaining that talent. So then that way we know that we not only can keep the door open and have them grow, but also have others come to the company and grow with us as well. It was a strategic focus for our Black community to establish this as an ERG for our partners.
And what did that look like explaining, oh, we want to make this official and we want to have this other piece behind it? How did that conversation go over?
Luckily, many of the founders, I'm one of the 17 founders, and luckily the majority of us were attached to human resources. So we knew the rules. We understood the goals of the company. And so we tied our initiatives to our company goals. And so it was easier for us to gain alignment because of that.
That's very interesting. And you said this was 2002, right?
2007.
2007?
Yes,
Okay. I'm curious then. Lots happening even like in the economy around
indeed.
2007.
Yes.
How has the ERG space changed over the years since 2007? I feel
Ooh.
like a lot of people in the space now really have no context on where ERGs come from in that sense. So what was it like and how is it different then versus now?
There's a lot going on in 2007, and especially when you think about social injustice, the economy, where we were as a country, and the transition of power as well. And our employees wanted a space to come together and to talk and to share their opinions, a safe space for psychological safety. However, what they were seeing was impacting them. Things have changed in the sense of a broader net for more communities to come together, understanding not just the oppressive systemic oppression, but also the joyous occasions that are needed to celebrate. Community is needed more than ever now. We were cut off from each other in 2000 or 2020. And so the growth and need for community and that emerging ERG in your company space was one that I would say is growing, but it hasn't truly changed from the need of the employee of 2007. Representation and the voice of the employee, it's what's changed. And understanding, I would say in 2007, it was more of a timid voice. Representing and showing up as a marginalized community, thinking that you had no power. In 2020 and beyond, that voice growing, you understand the power of community, you understand the power of change and influence. And that is a big difference from 2007 to 2020 and beyond.
Are there or have you seen it where there might be a good and a bad side with more of a voice? And I've been having more a conversation around this too with a few people, but I'm
Mhm.
curious if you've seen this in the ERG space where there's a bad thing with more people being more vocal.
I think strategy is the name of the game, and understanding processes. Also, understanding that your business needs to be successful in order for your ERG to be successful in many cases as well. Once that is understood, then it's easier to craft an approach that all can be aligned with and can get along with. But you're right, there are a lot more voices, many of whom should have been at the table a long time ago and prioritized when you think about accessibility, when you think about inclusion and belonging. Where I'm seeing also is understanding how we can have a stepped approach. Many times we need to create a foundation, or what we throw at the wall to change will not last. And I think that's what we're seeing now from 2020 to 2024, in that many companies did not focus on a foundation. And so their I&D strategy and approaches may not have lasted as long as they wanted them to.
We're gonna circle back on that too, because do I have a lot to say when it comes to foundations. They are rocky, especially for ERG programs. And I think even a segue to that. So you were in HR,
Yes,
obviously not the ERG program manager to start off, but now you lead an ERG program. What was
yes.
that transition like? Because I'm seeing a lot of people are starting to realize that they're like the skill set to lead an ERG program is different than just being an being an HR leader. It's also
Indeed.
even different than being a diversity leader. So, what was that kind of transition like?
I am so happy that I had 8 other careers prior to having being a program manager with this company. One of that focus, or what those focuses, was around analytics. And so understanding how to tell that story through the data is important when it goes to being an inclusion and diversity manager. What is also different is influence. You understand that everyone wants to be part of the cool kid club, but you have no money, honestly. And so, how do you influence others and how do you tell that story is a skill set that I took from not only being an ERG leader, but also a skill set I took from being a mom. It's one that I have two little ones, and I needed to learn how to communicate to little ones in a way that showed that not only that I was confident, but also understood the assignment and what we were doing so that they would follow me inexplicitly. And I took that skill set of confidence and also reassurance to my day job. And so I can honestly say analytics, speaking with those that you need to have a different communication style with, and then also being able to tell the story and know that you're supposed to be in that room. In the beginning, there were times when I would say, what do we call it? Understanding, feeling as if you don't belong. What's that? Feeling as if you may not belong into the room. And I'm losing that saying, but I feel like we can edit it back in. But understanding that you are truly the source of knowledge and owning that space was important. And that was where the switch came as well. You weren't just invited for being the Black woman most tenured of the company. You were invited because of your strategy, of your outlook, and of your, I would say, uh, alignment where they could not see. And so your vision was needed.
So I wasn't in corporate back then. I was still in high school. Or well, I don't even know. 2007. I was in like 6th grade, actually, I think. But even then, I would imagine, this is always how I just pictured it, but in the corporate space, because of all the racial inequalities, leading a group like this, it must have meant a lot
Mhm.
based on what was happening in the world at the time. Not to mention, even in the US, so I'm trying to think about politically. So I think Obama was about to become president, if I'm not mistaken.
Mhm.
So powerful time for the Black community leading this ERG. As a Black woman, what would you say that meant to you, I guess, leading this space at the time? What was really the importance on why the space was needed? Does that make sense, a question?
It totally does. And I'll say it wasn't just me. I joined the company because the head of communications at the time was a Black woman with blonde locks. And she walked around, knew her stuff backwards and forwards, but was authentically her. And
Mm.
I knew that if she, as the right hand to our CEO, was there and able to be freely in her skin and in her space, then there was space for me as well. And I would say I wasn't scared, but yet navigating was challenging because there are many who felt as if racism was about to be solved in 2008, that we did not need a space for specific communities, and did not understand how this connected to what was important to them, which was stability, lower turnover, and a higher sense of belonging. Being able to prove that through the numbers, as well as provide that space for having a red velvet cake cook-off, for instance, for having a intellectual leader come and speak to us and pour into us from outside the company. That was important for us. And so it wasn't too much of a challenge for support, but more of a challenge in understanding of why these are needed in the first place.
Mm. Now, I resonate with you mentioning you had several different careers. I think you said 8 other careers before you
Yeah,
were a program manager. So you had the skill set to tell the story of why it was needed.
indeed.
How did that go? What were some like things that you used to really, being based on what the sentiment was at the time, how did you tell the story of why this was important?
Indeed. As I called out, utilize analytics and data visualization to understand the story. Understood from my partner relations days, connecting it to the why when it goes to the lower or partner sentiment that we were feeling from understanding those analytics from that department, moving to understanding benefits and payroll. So I know what our bottom line is looking and how to tell that story. Being able to know the knowledge of how change is made, being a business system analyst, allowed me to be able to map out a feasible process for us to actually align to rather than throwing something at the wall and praying that it worked. And then all of that in being a trusted people manager, not just of those that reported to me, but also being able to influence whole departments and then being trusted advisors from our networks. So our networks had at least four executive sponsors, and we as leaders had access to them at any point in time. And that is what prepped me for my executive presence when it goes to how to speak in the boardroom, what is important to them, what is the tagline, how to communicate. And so those are just some of the skill sets that I brought with me, as well as my character and my integrity. And that's just something that you can't learn, it's what you have.
Definitely. Definitely. I want to double tap on the exec sponsor piece. Now, I was at a company where they had multiple executive sponsors. I think all the ERGs had three. And in that, I would see that that almost gave some of the executive sponsors almost like permission to disengage and put it back on one. So, is that still the case where the networks have four executive sponsors? And what recommendations do you have on how to best engage executives?
I have expectations of my executive champions. I expect them to be an advocate. I expect them to be strategically and help our networks with their strategy. I expect them to be a mentor. I expect them to be a proponent of the community and a learner of the community. And so, as I check in with them on a quarterly basis, not just with them, but also their co-chairs and their leadership team, to understand, are they meeting the expectations of an executive champion? And if they are not, then there's others willing to step in and wanting to support the network. It's a coveted role. And so, as we see our networks flourishing and growing, a lot of our executives want to be tied to that innovation as well. And so it's a win situation. But there are expectations that I hold them to on a quarterly basis. And we may have to have a conversation or we may not.
Now, how do you make it a coveted role? I think I see it a lot where it's almost, I don't know, it's something to do or just something to add onto your LinkedIn bio, but how do you make it something that executives really want to be part of?
When they see that the company focuses on inclusion and diversity. And this is where we call out business resource groups and business initiatives. For instance, we're involving a change for military partners and those military spouses to be able to transfer at a faster rate than what our current rate is. We have executives that want to be tied to that, that want to say that they helped with the strategy and the input of that. Maybe their day job is not focused on that. So it gives them experience that helps them move up in the company. It really is a career builder and a win that their managers and their SVPs look at.
I love that, especially how you're referencing business impact in this sense, where it's really talking about making things better for the employees internally. This way, they can show up better as employees, and even that can impact like their production on like the things that they do ultimately by just making better working standards for them.
Indeed.
Now, it's become a conversation in the ERG space around like business impact and
Mhm.
how that could potentially show up externally with an ERG. I will say I'm not fully convinced, but curious your take on ERGs impacting external driving business directly.
I feel you on this. My take and where I have influence is that the idea is coming from the ERG. We're able to connect on the roots, not just in the weeds, but the roots of where either sentiment, opinion is coming from. But it's my job as one who gets paid a salary to bring that initiative forward. I'm not going to lean on my ERG to drive an external initiative, especially for um, a Fortune 100 company. Although they are recognized and provided ample recognition, that's a job. And that's a job that requires a skill set that an ERG leader may or may not have. And so I'm of the camp of, please, I want to create that safe space to bring those ideas, to trust me, to know that we're going to process it and process the steps out to get it done, and also know that we'll bring you along and not lean on you for to bring it to the finish line. I've been part of the ERG space as an ERG leader before I had this role, and being influential in different company policies, but it wasn't my day job. And I had to negotiate with my manager on, yes, I know you need this report. However, the CEO is asking me for my input on this initiatives. And what do you do? And how do you balance that? I promised once I got into this role that we'll be able to balance that for others that came after me.
So good. What you just mentioned, they might not have the skill set to truly be able to provide the best information. I even spoke to an ERG leader recently who the business consulted them about a product that they were going to put out. And the leads, they said, actually, no, we like this other thing better. And the product team went with what the lead said and it flopped.
Yeah.
And they just gave their opinion on something. It shouldn't be on them.
Indeed, I'm an expert in myself as being a Black woman in a walking intersection. But I went to school and I gained the knowledge and got a degree in comparative American cultures, got my certifications not only in HR, but also in inclusion and diversity. So, yes, I consider myself a practitioner. But as walking down the street, I'm an expert in myself. I'm not an expert in all Black women and the plight of Black women in the US as opposed to Canada or Latin America and such. And that is one thing that companies failed to realize in 2020 that they're learning, hopefully now, that are still continuing that inclusion initiative. Many have abandoned it. But those that are continuing it, hopefully they've learned that they need those experts and practitioners in place.
I hope so. I also will say I think there's work to be done where there's some learning. Some companies are still going to have to learn the hard way. Like you're going to have to bring in an expert
Mm-hmm.
who can meet at the middle. So I love that. Now, flash forward, we kicked off with the 2007 launch of the Black ERG as an official ERG.
Yes.
And then over the years, really around a lot of stuff happened, specifically around like the Black community, even when thinking about things that might have been like highly emotionally charged, lots of things. I'm curious, what are some tips that you have, or even just learnings in general, as you navigated the space, whether it was as an ERG leader or even as a program manager, as like big things happen that impact the communities that we're hoping to support?
I think the biggest learning is don't ignore it. I think back in 2007 and before that, we were expected as employees to leave our emotions at the door, to never talk about religion, politics, or anything that broached the subject of those interceding topics. I think so much trauma has happened with social media bringing that lens for all of us to see, and not just see but over and over again. I feel as if we can no longer act as if it's not impacting us. And I know that we have our past leaders and Black intellectuals speaking of double consciousness and the meaning of being and holding two consciousness of being of color in the US, and yet having to swallow your pride, per se, in order to do a job to make a living. That is what I lovingly see our generations coming and saying, forget that. I've gone through too much to be able to now create a shield, and you're going to learn about me. and we're going to create a space where we no longer have to hide together. And that's what I do enjoy seeing about the change. Um, but also, I do see that we as a community are realizing more and more the need for mental health, and to knock down the stigma of getting help for what we have seen, dealt with, or had to internalize for generations.
How have you seen ERGs play a part in furthering those conversations around mental health, regardless of community? Has there, like, whatever community was being supported with it, but has there been any like creative or interesting ones that come to mind?
Yeah, at my company, we started having family meetings. And that's with each ERG, not just from the Black community, but meetings where it was those who identify with the community a safe space to be able to talk. And with a guided professional. So it wasn't just talk, it was okay, so what three things do we want to focus on coming out of this? But also, unlike before, it was during work hours, not a volunteer time, but a time where you can say, you know what, I'm going to put my work down and come together with my community and grieve together, hold each other up, or celebrate together as well. I think that is something that has evolved. I think also the ways in which we're able to communicate. There are 17 different ways, and this is what I love about technology and the growth of technology. There's 17 different ways to get in touch with me, or to get in touch with our different employees. And so with that, it's no longer having to go through a hierarchy. Information can be shared, can be developed, and that I think is a great development from ERGs of the past.
Yeah, we have time, but not a whole lot. So one thing I definitely did want to mention or didn't want to skip is the actual management of 13 ERGs, because that is a beast of a to do. There's some people newer to this space who may not have all the skill sets that you have, and oftentimes they don't, especially around analytics. We didn't even have time to really get into that today, but what would be just like some best practices off the top of your head if you had to have three for people around being a really strong ERG program manager? What would those be?
Provide clear role and behavior expectations for your ERG leaders. Provide clear expectations for your leaders on what you can deliver. And then also, I would say provide space for what will come either on a weekly basis, monthly basis, or an annual basis when it goes to society, being able to input how your work changes as well. Many times we go in so much with an agenda that we don't create that space for how societies and those changes impact our work. So to factor that in first would be a good point of practice, and to be able to know how to pivot and when to pivot.
See, I had to spotlight you for that one just so they could really hear it from you. All those things. I just cannot emphasize those things enough. And oftentimes, unfortunately, they don't exist within the ERG space.
Yes.
I think that's really what the ERG movement is about in trying to institute best practices. Now, another kind of hot topic, and this is just one that's been on my mind, but I would love to hear it from your perspective because you've seen like this evolution of ERGs. And I know there's a phrase in the ERG space that I see a lot, which is like food, flags, and fun. And it's typically mentioned in a negative light. We shouldn't be food, flags, and fun. We got to be more than just that. And I get it. However, I won't say my opinion.
Mhm.
I'll ask you, what's your take with that phrase?
Like it, I love it. Food, flags, and fun. It's all good. However, I'm here for change as well, as we know that what's working or what we have going now, it's not working for everyone. And so, how do we, as I called out earlier, how do we align what we want to do and the change that we want to see to our company goals and to our company initiatives? It's got to be more than food, flags, and fun in order to create that engagement for an employee. So, how do you dig deeper into talent acquisition, digging deeper into talent management, being able to impact how we learn as a team and as an employee, being able to show it's about telling the story. So being able to show the importance of inclusion and also that we currently aren't doing that will get you in those rooms and at the table to be able to impact. But as you called out, though, that's a lot of things to impact all at once if your company isn't already doing that and you may be only one person and you don't want to put that all on your ERG leaders. So that's where prioritization goes in. And that's where also you have the influence of leaders that will take your lead and be able to finish your idea and bring it to fruition. You need your talent acquisition manager on board in order to understand to create a more accessible and more non-biased program to bring in talent to your company. You need your learning and development manager on board in order to create a more non biased learning, but then also what is the accountability of our managers from that learning. That is where the influence of our leaders or having that influence, I'm able to be able to bring my initiatives forward.
Now, this might shock you, but I'm seeing a lot of companies where all the teams you just listed don't really want anything to do with the ERG program. What would be your thoughts there and what the ERG program should focus on if change via partnership
Mhm.
is not on the table?
Oh. If change via partnership isn't on the table, then change via analytics will always be on the table. ERGs provide a sense of belonging and a sense of community, which means you have a highly engaged employee that is 80% more likely to stay than they are to leave the company. That's what you share with leadership that is not wanting to partner with ERGs. You share that their job will be easier, their P&L will be lighter because we're not spending the money on rehiring for skill sets that we can learn and develop in-house.
I love that. And that is honestly, I just think a lot of the companies I see, that is truly where they're at right now. Which means, to your point, if you have an engaged member, then that is an analytic to say, look, but we've been able to do something here that is of value to you, especially with those teams that you just mentioned, where they're all really focused on driving again impact internally, improving the lives of employees internally, and increasing representation. Having engaged members is, if you don't have those, then your analytics don't look good.
And true. And it's understood that when I'm engaged, I'll get things done. And that also feels as if I'm rewarded, recognized for what I do as well. If, again, you're able to prove that with the analytics and also tie it to targeted attrition, understanding that each human resource leader has a targeted number of attrition for each year. Your
Mhm.
ERG can impact that in a positive way. And that's how you can share the win with talent acquisition and talent management.
Now that's an interesting one. I'm definitely noting that down. Targeted attrition, because I haven't heard that brought up
Yeah.
from specific HR leaders. So that's good to note that there could be a huge tie between, or even if the attrition rate is still high.
Yeah.
Attrition is when they leave, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So even if the attrition rate is high based on ERG members, that could even just be a signal that there's even more of a need for things to be done. So tying it to that rate hadn't I didn't realize how close HR really monitored attrition like that on a leader by leader basis. I like that. Even then, even to circle back to the first question on this, that's why for a lot of companies, I get the food flags and fun piece. But for a lot of them, it almost starts with food flags and fun to get those engaged members. And I'm all for the change making that impacts internal employees. but a lot of them, a lot of companies have not gotten the formula down to how they even make the ERG enjoyable for people to want to participate in.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate. So, what tips, or even, I know we're at time, but what have been some of your favorite initiatives that you've seen that really did like impact engagement, that people really wanted to get involved with? Maybe even some that you thought were creative or unusual that really worked.
I think about when I think about Lunar New Year and it being this year in February, and an intersectional opportunity with Black History Month and engagement for our employees to learn about both initiatives that I've seen where the impact has come from ERGs. But I would say also with the food, flags, and fun, think about the thought of an HBCU homecoming, and yet with a more understanding of the benefits and impact of the company. You
Mm.
got to make it where folks want to come and learn. So the food, the flags, they got to be there somewhere. But then again, it's almost like teaching a young child. When they're having fun, they don't know they're learning. And that's something that I've moved to my day job as well. Keep it fun as well as keep them learning, and they'll grab onto facts because it's a core memory for them. And it goes to how they're growing as humans. And so that's where I've been able to, I won't say master, but it's one of the skill sets I'm able to implement.
I love that. I wish I had you spotlit for that part because, wow, huge takeaway there where I think that's something a lot more people can learn. Absolute last question this time, because I know they're going to be so upset that I didn't ask, being that you manage 13 ERGs.
Mhm.
How do you manage it? Are there any softwares or anything that you use to help make it easier?
Oh, goodness gracious. Outside of being a very innovative company to our customers, we're not as innovative internally. Still using, so I do have access to and connected to our human resource data. So I'm able to pull analytics in time. But when it goes to internal communication, I utilize email, I utilize Smartsheet to track. I utilize, gosh, we're talking about low tech and analytics. We have a SharePoint that we all connect to. The key is not the, at least for me, the program that you use. It's ensuring that there's a centralized place that all understand that information will be up to date and be able to be utilized for all leaders. That can be, it could be SharePoint, it could be Teams, but it needs to be a trusted resource that is updated and editable and accessible for all.
Could not agree more. Such a strong way to close. This has been another amazing episode of the ERG Movement Podcast. The thing that we always typically close with is the ERG movement is all about forward progression in the ERG space. So if you had to say one word of what you hope to see from ERGs going through this movement, trying to get to this next level, what will be that one thing? It doesn't have to be one word, but one thing that you really hope to see from ERGs.
I got it. When you know better, you do better.
I love it. I have nothing to add. It's been such a great podcast, and I'm looking forward to catching you all on the next one.